Ralph Schoenman.
And Maya Shone, along with
Ralph Poynter.
And today we're going to discuss the upcoming activities in support of Lynne Stewart and the oral arguments on the appeal of Lynne's resentencing that will take place Wednesday, February 29th in the morning at the U.S. Courthouse at 500 Pearl Street in Manhattan. We want you all to be there and to be at the events that will be taking place on the Monday and Tuesday before this important hearing. It's almost 10 years, April 8, 2002, when former Attorney General John Ashcroft stood in the ruins of the World Trade Center to announce the indictment of our Mother Courage, Lynne Stewart. 10 years. Lynne has gone through the trial. She's gone through the sentencing of 28 months. She went through the appeal of the sentencing, where the appellate court stated that Judge Codal was too lenient to Lynne, gave their advisory opinions. Remember, this was only their advisory opinions of the mistakes that Judge Codal made. They didn't come up with any judicial error. But they so pounded on Judge Codal that he issued a resentencing of 10 years. The government originally had requested 30 years, a life sentence for Lynne Stewart, and then even at the resentencing they were asking for 15 years. Lynne is now facing 10 years, and the appeal of this resentencing will be heard on February 29th. There's an incredible appeal that's been written, which includes a remarkable biography of our Mother Courage, Lynne Stewart, as well as important legal points. You can find it at www.lynnstewart.org/category/legal docs. Today, Ralph and Ralph will discuss the events that are going to take place, how Lynne is doing at the Federal Medical Center in Carswell, the important work that she's been doing with the other prisoners, and what you can do to support Lynne Stewart and other political prisoners. Ralph.
Well, I think we should understand and make clear to our listeners that the imprisonment of Lynne Stewart and the prosecution and what we call the persecution of Lynne Stewart arises from the fact that she and Ramsey Clark and other attorneys were defending the blind Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, who was accused of being involved in the Landmarks plot, which is the omnibus terror plot imputed by the government to the blind Sheikh, a plot to blow up the major landmarks of New York City, as well as the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. And in the course of the trial, the defense was able to demonstrate that the overwhelming evidence showed the role of not the accused, but rather the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Mossad in these events. That documentation, of course, goes to the heart of the undermining and expose of the real nature of the war on terror and the terrorizing of the American people in the effort to gain acquiescence in wars of predation across the globe. And it's the seminal role of Lynne Stewart in defending the Sheikh, exposing the issues that motivated the government to take an unprecedented step, namely to assimilate the defense attorney to the presumptive crimes of the person that he or she is defending. That effectively wipes out due process, annihilates the Bill of Rights, and makes it impossible for anyone to have a trial in the United States, or for that matter, any lawyer to take on an unpopular client without fear that they themselves will suffer the same consequence of the client merely for the act of defending them. Those are the issues at stake here, and in the effort to frame Lynne Stewart and to bury her alive in prison, her freedom of speech, her basic civil liberties have been abrogated, and of course in the process of abrogating her rights, everybody's rights have been thrown under the bus. And nothing is so clear about that as the formal consequence in the National Defense Administrative Act, which allows the executive and the president to detain anyone at random determination of their own under the aegis of the military without recourse to trial, without the entitlement to know the charges against them, without the ability to consult attorneys. This is what arises from persecution and prosecution of Lynne Stewart, and that's why this case is of fundamental importance to everyone listening to this.
Now, I'd like to go back and put this in perspective of time. Lynne's original so-called crime, defending the blind sheikh, but while defending the blind sheikh, she proved that the government was guilty in this so-called terrorist case. And subsequent to this case, many other lawyers have gone to trial on so-called terrorist cases, and they too prove that the government were the instigators of these so-called terrorist crimes, and there can be no doubt or argument that what they used these terrorist cases to do was blind the American people so that they could pick their pockets. And there could be no doubt that the American people's pockets have been picked in many ways. We are looking to have events prior to Lynne's the 29th. We're looking to have the 28th occupy Tom Paine Park, that's 1 block from the courthouse, on Lafayette and Worth Street, and the 29th in the morning to be there for Lynne's hearing. Now, one of the things I remember about Lynne, her first day in law school in Newark, she came back and she said, you had to see this wonderful man, Arthur Conoy, who talked about constitutional rights and talked about human rights and talked about how one lawyers. And one of the things that she was impressed with Arthur Conoy, who was very instrumental in the civil rights cases along with Thurgood Marshall and other attorneys, he said, you do not win these cases in the courtroom, you win them outside of the courtroom on the street. So we are looking to win this case before it goes before the judges on the street with the participation of the people who care. So
and when we're talking about occupying Tom Paine Park, we don't mean for a few minutes. You mean from the beginning of Tuesday, the 28th, all the way through the opening of the court session on the 29th.
Exactly, 7 p.m. until. And that will be until the next day when the case is being heard. We want to send a message to the government that Lynne Stewart and other political prisoners have not been forgotten. When I talk to Lynne, the first thing I always say is, how are you? And her answer always is, Ralph, I'm in jail. That says so much. But one of the important things is that I know they have not broken her spirit, because when she was dealing with the second inmate that had died while they were in prison, while asking for medical help, while being denied medical help under the guise that they were just faking it. And when the second inmate died,
who was ailing and being aided by Lynne, was refused medical treatment by the prison authorities, and she died. And Lynne was warned not to say anything about it, told that if she said anything about it, that they would take away her basic privileges. They would put her in the hole. She would be cut off from her correspondence, from her telephone calls. And Lynne's response was to say, what I will say is, I charge murder.
Lynne was helping one inmate who was on dialysis, who was asking for help, and they were sending to the nurse's office for help, and they were telling the authorities that this woman was very sick. They said that there's nothing wrong with her. She was faking it. And in the end, Lynne was helping the woman get down to the nurse's headquarters, and they didn't quite make it. They got to the lavatory, and Lynne laid her down on the lavatory floor where the woman died. When I was talking to Lynne about it, she says, Ralph, I don't want to go that way. The authorities spoke to Lynne and said that no one was to blame. This is just something that happened. And a year later, or less, another woman begins to complain about being in great pain, and they tell her that she is faking it, and there's nothing wrong with her. And Lynne was not involved in helping her get to the nurse's office, but she died. And then they realized that she had a broken hip. So she had been surviving with a broken hip, complaining about her pain, and the prison saying that she was faking it. And there was another memorial service. The authorities came to Lynne and said, listen, they're going to ask you to speak, but you must remember that this is not about blame. So speak, but not about blame. So Lynne called me to say, listen, this is going to affect you as well as it's going to affect me.